Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Geoffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health, and really without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Welcome to episode 97 of Nerdery and Murdery.
Big 97. I'm Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murdery. Welcome to another week of the highs and lows, the ups and the downs, the good and the bad. And Zig, I will let you take over on the nerdery side of the house.
Sweet. Today we're going to talk about MST3K.
Mystery Science Theater 3000.
It is an American science fiction comedy film review television series, which is a mouthful. It was originally created by Joel Hodgson. The show premiered on KTMA TV, now WUCW in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Sorry about that.
Easy enough for you to say?
Yeah. It started on November 24th, 1988. It then moved to nationwide broadcast, first on the Comedy Channel, Comedy Central, for 7 seasons until its cancellation in 1996. Thereafter, it was picked up by the Sci-Fi Channel and it aired for 3 more seasons until another cancellation in August of 1999. 60-episode syndication package titled The Mystery Science Theater Hour was produced in 1993 and broadcast on Comedy Central and syndicated to TV stations in 1995, which is where I first saw it. In 2015, Hodgson led a crowdfunding revival of the series with 14 episodes in its 11th season, first released on Netflix on April 14th, 2017. and another 6-episode season following on November 22nd, 2018. A second successful crowdfunding effort in 2021 will bring at least 13 additional episodes to be shown through Gizmoplex, an online platform that Hodgson will develop for future MST3K works that launched in March of 2022. And as of 2022, 230 episodes and a feature film have been produced, as well as 3 live tours.
I thought it was called Riff Tracks now.
Riff Tracks is still going on.
Oh, okay.
So between 1999 and the re-release in 2017, that's when they started doing Riff Tracks.
Gotcha.
They're still doing Riff Tracks.
Yeah.
Which you can also get on this. I gotta find it again. The Gizmoplex.
Mm-hmm.
Gizmo Industries. Gizmoplex has all of the seasons from the original season on that old local TV station all the way up till 1999 for free. So you could download the app for Gizmoplex, which is basically the only thing on the app is Riff Tracks and MST3K, and see them all. Now the new stuff you do have to pay for, at least until they go on to the next season, and then you'll be able to see the new stuff as well. But there's 230 episodes on there right now.
Wow.
That's not counting the Netflix stuff, which you can see the 2 seasons that Netflix did on Netflix. So yeah, there's a lot. Well, I mean, they did it from 88 to 99. Then they did Riff Tracks from 99 till like 2016. And they're still doing Riff Tracks. And from 2016 up, they've been producing MST3K again. So there's a lot of it out there. To give some background on the show, the show initially starred Hodgson as Joel Robinson, a janitor trapped by 2 mad scientists, the Mads, on the Earth-orbiting satellite of love, which is in the shape of a bone, and forced to watch a series of B-movies to monitor his reactions to them. To keep his sanity, Joel crafts sentient robot companions, including Tom Servo, Crow T-Robot, and Gypsy, to keep him company and help him humorously comment on each movie as it plays, a process known as riffing. Each 2-hour episode would feature a single movie, often edited for time constraints, sometimes preceded by various old shorts and educational films, with Joel, Tom, and Crow watching in silhouette from a row of theater seats at the bottom of the screen. The theater segment was framed with interstitial sketches called host segments. The show's cast changed over its duration. Most notably, the character of Joel was replaced by Mike Nelson, played by Michael T. Nelson, halfway through the show's 5th season. Other cast members, most of whom were also writers for the show, include Trace Beaulieu, John Weinstein, Jim Mallow, Kevin Murphy, Frank Conniff, Mary Jo Pell, Bill Corbett, Paul Chaplin, and Bridget Jones Nelson. The 2017 revival featured a primary new cast, including Jonah Ray, who plays the new human test subject, Jonah Heston, along with Felicia Day and Patton Oswalt as the Mads, and Baron von Hampton Yount, and Rebecca Hansen voicing Tom Servo, Crow T-Robot, and Gypsy, respectively. Season 13 brings back the cast while integrating Emily Connor, played by Emily Marsh, and others from the live tours of this era. MSTK3's original run did not garner high viewership numbers. However, the show's popularity spread through online word of mouth by its fans known as Misties, who would remind others to keep circulating the tapes. Frequent repeat syndication and home media offerings produced by Rhino Entertainment concurrently. The popularity continues through Shout Factory, who along with Hodgson now owns the rights to the show and supports the revived series. MST3K now listed as one of Time Magazine's 100 best TV shows of all time in 2007, and TV Guide was noted MST3K as one of the top cult television shows. The show won a Peabody Award in 1993, was also nominated for 2 Emmy Awards in 94 and 95, and for the Cable Ace Awards from 92 to 97. So every year from 92 to 97. The show was considered highly influential, contributing towards the practice of social television, and former cast members launching similar projects based on the riffing of films, including The Film Crew, riff tracks, and cinematic Titanics. MST3K also brought to light several older movies that had fallen into obscurity or had received little or no public attention when originally released. Many of these films were subsequently identified as amongst the worst movies ever made, most notably Manos, The Hand of Fate. So the idea of keep the tape circulating, what it was is people up in the Minneapolis area and then people all over the country once it moved over to Comedy Central or the Comedy Channel would record an episode on videotapes and make subsequent recordings of that and send them to their friends so they could circulate. And the idea was once you watched it, you put it in another envelope and send it to somebody else to drum up viewership, which I guess you could kind of get them on piracy, but they were trying to get the show out there more. So no one really took umbrage to this because they were keeping the show alive. And this show was pretty popular amongst most nerds that I know. I'd like to cast your mind back. I want to use the pod back machine if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
Go back to about 1996, 1997. Don and I are sitting in his apartment and we watched the end of an old sword and sandal movie. I don't even remember what it was. I want to say it was a Hercules movie, but it may have been Ator the Fighting Eagle. Anyway, we only caught like the last 20 minutes of it. It's like, oh, hey, it's on another channel. We turned it on into the other channel and it was an MST3K show of it.
That's funny.
So we watched the movie. It's like, this movie is not that bad. And then we watched the MST3K movie of it and then started riffing amongst each other. It was a fun evening. We had a good time. We canceled going out to the bar to sit and do that instead. So some fans of MST3000 thought its character was a stoner because of his sleepy-eyed demeanor. In truth, it was a holdover from the pilot in which Joel Hodgson was exhausted while filming because he hadn't slept for 4 days. Many of the inventions featured in the MST3K opening exchange were props that Joel had personally built and used in his stand-up comedy routines. When he left, the exchange was quickly discontinued since the inventions were of his division. So they had to, after he left, they had to redo the opening because he basically made all of those little bits. Hodgson is credited with devising the show's concept. Prior to the show, Hodgson was an up-and-coming comedian from Minneapolis, and he moved to Los Angeles and made appearances on Late Night with David Letterman and Saturday Night Live. He had been invited by Brandon Tartikoff to be on the NBC sitcom co-starring Michael J. Fox, but Hodgson felt the material was not funny and declined. The proposed sitcom went unrealized. He further became dissatisfied with the Hollywood attitude when they tried to double their offer, acquiring what he called a healthy disrespect for the industry. So he moved back to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he took a job at a t-shirt printing factory. So he made screen printed t-shirts. But it allowed him to start conceiving of more weird comedy ideas. One show idea was the basis for MST3K, a show to comment humorously on movies that would also allow him to showcase the little props and weird things that he'd done, like the puppets for Tom Servo and Crow. So Hodgson referred to those jokes as riffs, based both on the idea of musical riffs as well as the idea of comedy riffs, a term he attributed to the Simpsons writer Dana Gould. So in terms of movie selections, Hodgson had recalled that his college roommate had a copy of the Golden Turkey Awards. And he had previously wondered why no one had made any program about these adorable, weird movies listed within it. Hodgson said that part of the idea for MST3K came from the illustration for the song I've Seen the Movie Too, drawn by Mike Ross, in the liner notes for Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. So if you open up Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, you'll notice that there's a screen with some seats with a silhouette of somebody looking up at the movie. That's where he got the idea for the silhouette showing of the films. And the show setting is the idea of a pirate radio station broadcasting from space. Hodgson credits Silent Running, a 1972 science fiction film directed by Douglas Trumbull, as being perhaps the biggest direct influence of the show's concept. So it's about a lonely guy in a space station with only robots as friends. The film is set in the future and centers on a human, Freeman Lowell, who is the last crew member of a spaceship containing Earth's last surviving forests. His companions consist of 3 robot drones. MST3K and the Joel Robinson character occasionally reflect Lowell's hippie-like nature. Hodgson wanted the feel of the show to appear homemade and cited the example of a crude mountain prop used during the Saturday Night Live sketch Night on Freak Mountain that received a humorous reaction from the studio audience as the type of this aesthetic that he wanted for the show. Hodgson also made dozens of such robots from random parts before as art that he sold to friends and others, and he knew he could incorporate that into his show as well. Both old movies and music inspired several of the show's character names as developed by Hodgson. The show's name came from the promotional phrase mystery scientist used by magician Harlan Tarbell, and a play on the name of Sun Ra's band, the Mythic Science Orchestron, or the 3000, was added to spoof the common practice of adding 2000 to show a product's name in lights of the, at that point, upcoming 21st century. Because they were doing that a lot. The Gateway computers, Gateway 2000 is what you bought.
Right.
Until 1999 when they changed their name to Gateway. And Hodgson thought it would set his show apart by making it 3000. Dr. Forrester was named after the main character in the War of the Worlds, and the Satellite of Love was named after the song of the same name by Lou Reed, Satellite of Love. Crow T. Robot was inspired by the song Crow from Jim Carroll's Catholic Boy, whilst Rocket No. 9's name was inspired by the original name of Sun Ra's album, Interstellar Lowways. The theater shot primary component of the episode is taped in a Shadorama. The seats were a black painted foam core board sitting behind the actual seats towards the camera for the hosts, and stages of Crow and the Tom puppets. The humans wore black clothing while the robot puppets wore painted black. The screen they watched was a white Luma key screen as to create the appearance of silhouettes. The actors would follow the movie and the scripts through television monitors located in front of them. So the television monitors were in front of them below the chroma key screen, because the back of the theater seats were just foam core. They were actually sitting in regular chairs, and they had those monitors in front of them so they could watch the monitors. And so you'll notice that the puppets are always looking at the screen because that's the way they're playing them. But occasionally the host will have to looks down and then looks back up. That's because he's looking at those monitors down below the chroma key, or the Luma key, sorry. The door sequence was created to transition from host segments to the theater segments, which Hodgson took inspiration from the Mickey Mouse Club, noticing the commonality to the title credits of Get Smart were coincidental, because they got the idea from Get Smart, the doors opening and closing, from the Mickey Mouse Club back in the early 60s. The bone to ship transition in the film 2001 Space Odyssey, motivating him to make the Satellite of Love look like a bone. The show's theme song, the love theme for Mystery Science Theater 3000, was written by Hodgson and Weinstein, which helped to cement some of the broader narrative elements of the show, such as the Mads and Joel being part of an experiment. The song was composed by Charles Erickson with help from Hodgson in the style of Devo, the Replacements, and the Rivieras, particularly their cover of the song California Sun, which was sung by Hodgson. Initial shows used foam letters to make the show title, but the later created the spinning moon logo out of a 2-foot diameter fiberglass ball, covered with foam insulation and lettering cut from additional pieces of foam. Hodgson felt they needed a logo with a rotating effect as opposed to the flat 2D image, and thought they had envisioned a more detailed prop, with the letters being the top of a building on the moon. They had no time or budget for a project of that complexity and went with what they had. Musical numbers would also be used as part of the host segment, which Hodgson said came out naturally from the riffing process. They would find themselves at times singing along with the movie instead of just riffing at it, and took that to extend songs into the host segment. Hodgson approached Jim Mallon, at the time the production manager of KTM, a low budget local television station, with the idea of a show based on riffing on movies using robots that were created out of common objects. Mallon agreed to help produce a pilot episode, and Hodgson hired on local area comedians J. Elvis Weinstein, initially going by Josh Weinstein, but later changing it to J. Elvis to distinguish himself from Josh Weinstein, a well-known writer for The Simpsons, and Trace Ballou to develop the pilot show. By September 1988, Hodgson, Mallow, and Weinstein and Ballou shot a 30-minute pilot episode using segments from the 1968 science fiction film The Green Slime. In our YouTube playlist, I believe the very first video I showed was the pilot in its entirety. It is not good quality. It is probably recorded off of one of those tapes that got circulated 30, 40 years ago. But it is there, and you actually can see the props that he made originally. Also, some of the satellite is the the banks of videotapes that they used in the TV station. So you've got some old video tech in there as well. Camera work was done by Kevin Murphy, who was employed by KTMA. Murphy was also created the first doorway sequence and theater sign set. The initial episodes recorded on the long since defunct Paragon Cable Studios and Customer Service Center in Hopkins, Minnesota. On review, Hodgson found that of the robots, Beeper's design was not working well and tried a quick modification to replace its head with a toy gumball machine top, creating the basis for Tom's servo. Mallon met with KTMA station manager David O'Connor the next month and managed to get signed up for 13 episodes. And at this point, they were off and running. It premiered on KTMA on Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 1988, with its first episode, Invaders from the Deep, followed by a second episode, Revenge of the Mysterions from Mars at 8 p.m. The choice of running the premiere on Thanksgiving was by happenstance, as the station felt the show was ready to go at that point. According to Hodgson, initially the show's response was unknown until Mallon set up a phone line for viewers to call in. Response was so great that the initial run of 13 episodes was extended to 21, with the show running to May 1989. Hodgson and Mallon negotiated to secure the rights for the show for themselves, creating Best Brains Incorporated and agreeing to split ownership of the idea equally. During this time, a fan club was set up, and the show held its first live show at Scott Hansen's Comedy Gallery in Minneapolis to a crowd of over 600. But despite the show's success, the station overall declined fortunes, forced it into file for bankruptcy, recognized in July 1989. So the station was going out of business, even though this show was kind of a hit. At the same time, HBO was looking to build a stable of shows for their upcoming Comedy Channel cable network. HBO approached Best Brains and requested a sample of their material. Hodgson's and Mallow provided a 7-minute demo reel, which led to the network's greenlighting MST3K as one of the first 2 shows picked up by the new network. The Comedy Channel offered Best Brains $35,000 per episode, but allowed Best Brains to retain the show's rights. Best Brains was able to keep production local to Minnesota instead of the network's desired film in either New York or LA. And it would have cost 4 times per episode, according to Hodgson. Plus, he didn't want to move back to LA. He liked living in Minneapolis. Best Brains established an office and warehouse space in Eden Prairie for filming. With an expanded but still limited budget, they were able to hire more writers, including Mike Nelson, who became the host, Mary Jo Pell and Frank Conniff, and built more expensive sets and robot puppets. They retained the characters of Dr. Forrester and Dr. Earhart from the KTMA era and crafted the larger narrative for each episode being an experiment that they test on Joel. The show began its nationally run shortly after the Comedy Channel went on the air in November of 1989. So they were only off the air for 4 or 5 months before going to Comedy Central. Well, the Comedy Channel. The Comedy Channel and the Ha Network merged and became Comedy Central. The Ha brought its shows, Comedy Channel brought its shows, so they had more of a big stable. So the name of the event, a 30-hour marathon of MST3K episode during Thanksgiving of 1991. The name of the event was not only inspired by the traditional turkey meal on Thanksgiving, but also used the turkey from the Golden Turkey Awards to represent bad movies. What they called that 30-hour event was called Turkey Day, going with the Thanksgiving theme. Mystery Science Theater 3000, the movie, was produced during the latter half of the Comedy Central era and had a very limited theatrical release in 1996 through Universal Pictures and Gramercy Pictures. It featured Mike and the bot subject to the film This Island Earth by Dr. Forrester. Though well received by critics and fans, the film was a financial disappointment due to its limited distribution. It picked up kind of big on video, and that's how a lot of people were introduced to the series if they weren't already watching it, because it was on video shelves. Oh, what is this? And you take it home and watch it. It's like, oh wow, this is on the Comedy Central. And then they started to syndicate the show, and it ran on local television stations, which is, I think, the best way to watch this show. You need regular commercial breaks in between, because that's how they started, was on a small local television station. Hodgson decided to leave the series halfway through season 5 due to his dislike of being on camera and his disagreement with producer Mallon over creative control of the program. Hodgson also stated that Mallon's insistence on producing a feature film version of the show led to his departure, giving up his rights on the MST3K property to Mallon. Hodgson later told an interviewer, "If I had had the presence of mind to try and work it out, I would have rather have stayed because I didn't want to go. It just seemed that like I needed to." Though they held casting calls for a replacement for Hodgson on camera, the crew found that none of the potential actors really fit the role. Instead, having reviewed a test run that Nelson had done with the bots, the crew agreed that having Nelson, who was already appeared in several guest roles on the show, replace Hodgson would be the least jarring approach. So what's funny is the test for Mike Nelson wasn't a test for him. He was testing out new robot designs, because he was one of the writers and producers, and he was working on, he's like, oh, try this. So it just had him, talking with the robots, and they were like, this is it. This is what we want. And Mike actually ran longer than Jim Hodgson did. Mike ran for years and years and years. The replacement of Joel by Mike would lead to an off-jokingly Joel versus Mike flame war amongst fans, similar to the Kirk versus Picard discussions in the Star Trek fandom. But it was all in good fun, because, again, Mike had been with the show from pretty much from the beginning. Conniff left the show after 6 seasons, looking to go into writing TV sitcoms in Hollywood. Frank was soon replaced on the show by Dr. Forrester's mother, Pearl. By 1996, Comedy Central had started creating an identity for its network under the new leadership of Doug Herzog, which would lead to successful shows like The Daily Show, When Ben Stein's Money, South Park, and Dr. Katz Professional Therapist, leaving MST3K as an oddity on the network, taking up limited programming. Herzog thought that stating that MST3K helped put the network on the map and that its fans were passionate and believed it was necessary to change things around due to the show's declining and lackluster ratings. The network canceled MST3K after a 6-episode 7th season. The show staff continued to operate for as long as they still had finance to work with. MST3K's fan base staged a write-in campaign to keep the show alive, which led to the Sci-Fi Channel, a subsidiary of USA Networks, to pick up the series. Rod Perth, president of programming for USA Network, helped to bring the show to the Sci-Fi Channel, stating himself to be a huge fan of the show and believing that the sci-fi genre, sorry, that's hard to say, took itself too seriously, and this show was a great way of lightening up our own presentation. So it ran for another 3 years on the Sci-Fi Channel. The show didn't really change that much. I think they bumped up the closing doors. But again, if you go to that Gizmoplex, the Gizmoplex app on anything, all the old stuff, it's free to see. You can go back and watch episodes and episodes and episodes and see what we're talking about, as well as our YouTube playlist. So after the sci-fi series ran, the season 10 finale, Danger Diabolique, premiered on August 8th, 1999, during which, in the show's narrative, Pearl Forrester accidentally sent the satellite of love out of orbit, and Mike and the bots escaping and taking up residence in an apartment near Milwaukee, where they continue to riff movies. This is where we got the idea of riff tracks. So the guys kept doing riff tracks, Cinematic Titanic, and there was another one as well, but it's basically all the same show. And you can pick up all of those riff track things too. It's basically MST3K without the shadow box below it. That's all. You just see the movie instead and hear the riff tracks, guys. And I also still produced by Bad Brains or Best Brains. So there was a crowdfunding for an entertainment projects. However, Hodgson needed to reacquire the rights to the series at that point, still held by Malin and Best Brains. But by 2013, Hodgson's was working closely with Shout Factory, the distribution company handling the home media release for MST3K, and completed negotiations with Malin to buy the rights for MST3K for a 7-figure sum by August 2015. So I've 7 figures. That's a lot.
That's healthy.
Yeah. But it enabled the Kickstarter campaign to fund the revival to move forward. So we brought the revival to Netflix. Now, Joel Hodgson wasn't in actually he was, but he was just like a side character. And I want to say you didn't even really see his face, but he wanted to take more of a production role. So he got a lot of the other people from the show previously to kind of show up as guest roles and things like that, popping in, as well as a lot of other people who wanted to be involved, because there's a lot of people who grew up with this show and it's kind of their guilty pleasure, as it were. So the Kickstarter effort was led by Ivan Ashquith, a consultant who also had worked with Veronica Mars and Reading Rainbow Kickstarter accounts. And Hodgson estimated each episode would take about $250,000 to make. I don't think they got that much, but they were able to put it on. Comedian Jonah Ray plays Jonah Heston, the new host aboard the Satellite of Love, watching and riffing on the films. Hodgson had met Ray while recording an episode of the Nerdist podcast, and he felt would be a good fit. The voice of Crow and Tom Servo were provided by comedians Hampton Yount and Baron Vaughn, respectively, both of whom Ray recommended to Hodgson. Hodgson felt it was important for Ray to have his say on who would play these parts, since it would help Ray be comfortable with the role. And Felicia Day plays Kinga Forrester, Clayton Forrester's daughter, and one of the new Mads in charge of the experiments. Felicia Day just goes off on being a Mad. You can tell she watched the show. She just goes, she's all kinds of crazy. And then they grabbed Patton Oswalt. He is also a complete and total weirdo in this Netflix series. Love the Netflix series. They touched off on some stuff that I never thought they'd touch off on, like Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was great, but they actually had to pay to show. See, the thing about the original series is these movies were all B movies. So they were really cheap to get the rights to if you had to pay for them at all, which is why these old TV stations would have these horror nights where they show these old B movies, because they were relatively cheap to show. Especially the stuff by API and the stuff coming out of New World Pictures and Centurion, stuff like that. This was all basically Roger Corman fare, as it were. It wasn't just Roger Corman, but it was some other guys as well. So they actually got some stuff that was a little more a little more higher brow, but still a B movie. And they also got some people from the Second City. The role of Gypsy was played by Rebecca Hanson. A clone of Pearl Foster was who assists Kinga Harmar. Superstar led the skeleton crew, the house band in Kinga's lair, which was a great thing. I love that they brought the skeleton band into play to play music. New Conniff noted on his Twitter that Shout Factory would be cutting the former cast members in financially, at least, on the profits from the series. In addition, other cameos in the new episodes included Neil Patrick Harris, Jerry Seinfeld, and Mark Hamill. Weinstein initially stated that he had no interest in returning to the show, but eventually reprised his role as Dr. Lawrence Earhart on the second season of the Netflix revival. And then, of course, Netflix ended it after 2 seasons, which is what they had agreed on to doing in the first place. But on April 7th, 2021, Hodgson launched a second Kickstarter campaign to continue production of more MST3K episodes. He did have some difficulties with Netflix. Hodgson envisioned a sustainable production approach based on the support of fans and backers who wanted more episodes, but without having to worry about the financial support of a broadcast or cable network. So Hodgson set out to produce more episodes with the creation of the Gizmoplex in line with the Gizmo Industries, which is the company that built the Satellite of Love, whatnot. So that's what he's doing now. He was successful. Gizmoplex is out there. And again, you can see all of the old episodes. I don't think they have the Netflix episodes, but again, you can see those on Netflix. But during the annual 2021 Turkey Day Marathon, the 13 movies to be riffed as part of the 13th season were announced. These included Santo and the Treasure of Dracula, Robot Wars, Beyond Atlantis, Munchies, Dr. Mordred, Demon Squad, Gamera versus Gygar, The Batwoman, The Million Eyes of Samaru, H.G. Wells, The Shape of Things to Come, The Mask, and The Bubble, as well as The Christmas Dragon. So they're riffing on some bigger films now. So I have not seen any of the new one. I didn't splash out to buy the Gizmoplex stuff. I'm still watching the free version of it. But the first season, the 13th season, is supposed to be out by Thanksgiving of this next year anyway. So you can go in and see the MST3K 13th season, until they release the next one. But a lot of this stuff is readily available and out there. If you haven't seen it, it's very meta. I want to say the idea of meta-ness may have come from this show.
You think so?
I think so, especially riffing on this sort of thing. I mean, I've seen some of it before, but never to this extent, Because especially since you think they started out in 1988. That's a pretty long time ago to be doing this stuff. And I don't really see anything before this happening. So yeah, I think this is basically where the idea of riffing on things and meta comedy kind of came from. Cause you kind of need a weirdo behind it. You need somebody who can build these weird ass props and do the riffing and do the other stuff. And I think a lot of people give a lot of crap to, prop comics. They think, oh, Carrot Top, prop comics. That dude works real hard. He's also really funny. I'm tired of people giving that guy crap because he makes, funny props and stuff. It's still a creative outlet. It's still funny. The dude's still working, probably harder than some of the other guys.
I don't give him crap because of his props. His humor gets annoying to me very quickly. Very, very quickly.
I love his prop stuff. My favorite one is where he takes an ice tray with a level on it. He's like, see this? This is just really handy. It keeps you from spilling the ice trays. Just watch the level. There's no joke. I just thought it was really cool. And then throws it over his shoulder. Funniest thing I've ever seen him do.
Okay, I'll take your word for that.
It's brilliant. But yeah, all the little props of Tom Servo and stuff. And Gypsy, which I think they changed the name of Gypsy just because that's a kind of that's not a nice thing to say. But yeah, it's just good, clean fun. And I don't want to say subversive, but it's a little subversive. It's a little goofy, it's just, it's funny. And I would recommend it.
Every episode I've watched is hysterical. I love the ones that I've watched.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Especially if it's a movie that you like. And a lot of the times they are movies that I like. And he can capture some of the things that are going on inside of my brain when I'm watching it. Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
Right.
Is that a tire? Did they just paint a tire and strap it on a dude? Yeah. But that's about it for MST3K, other than get out and check it out. Enjoy it. There's a ton of it out there. Again, you can get that Gizmoplex for free. Mm. If you want to go in and buy the new episode, you can, but I would suggest start at the beginning and work your way forward. I've also included a lot of the little snippets from the other shows, including the pilot, in our YouTube playlist. There is a lot of stuff in there. I believe I have included some other full episodes as well. Until they get taken down. It is YouTube, so, But yeah, go out there and check that out, nerds. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. They're a lot of fun to watch. A lot of fun as they riff on the movies they're watching. It's great. It's great. Definitely give Mystery Science Theater 3000 a watch. They're well worth your time.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you for that. With that, we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For today, I got my information off All That's Interesting, Biography, and Wikipedia, and this is the story of Dennis Nilsen.
Dennis Nilsen.
So on February 8, 1983, a plumber named Michael Catran was called to 23 Cranley Gardens, an apartment building in North London. Residents had been complaining of blocked drains for some time, and Catran was there to fix the issue, but he never expected to find human remains.
Oh, no.
After Catran opened a drain cover on the side of the building, he began to pull out the blockage, but instead of seeing the typical mess of hair or napkins, he discovered a flesh-like substance and small broken bones. Dennis Nilsen, one of the building's residents, remarked, "It looked to me like someone had been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken," but Catran thought it looked disturbingly human, and as it turned out, he was correct, and the culprit behind this horrific mess was none other than Dennis Nilsen. From 1978 to 1983, Dennis Nilsen killed at least 12 young men and boys and did unspeakable things to their corpses. And to make an already horrific case even worse, the Scottish serial killer left behind a series of chilling audio tapes that described his murders in sickening detail. Born on November 23rd, go ahead.
Why? I mean, okay. So assuming you didn't have the blockage, assuming you were smart enough to use mainline cleaner to get all that stuff out of there, right? Mm-hmm. No one discovers this. Why make evidence of your crimes?
Well, because he's a disturbed individual. He's crazy, right?
Okay. All right. I'm with you.
This is the gruesome story of Dennis Nilsen.
Yes.
Born on November 23rd, 1945 in Fraserburgh, Scotland, Dennis Nilsen had a somewhat difficult childhood. He was born the second of three children, and his parents' marriage was an unhappy one, and as a result, Nilsen and his mother and siblings lived with his maternal grandfather, whom Nilsen adored. Nilsen claimed that his beloved grandfather's unexpected death when he was just 6 years old and the traumatizing viewing of his corpse at a funeral led to his later behavioral psychopathology. Now, that was a hard one to say. His mother went on to remarry and have 4 more children, leaving Nilsen a withdrawn and lonely child. And although Nilsen initially resented his stepfather, whom he viewed as an unfair disciplinarian, he gradually came to grudgingly respect him. Nilsen also realized early on that he was gay, and he was very uncomfortable with his sexuality. He kept his sexuality hidden from his family and his few friends. Because many of the boys to whom he was attracted had facial features similar to those of his young sister Sylvia, on one occasion he sexually fondled her, believing that his attraction towards boys might be a manifestation of the care he felt for her. Nilsen made no effort to seek sexual contact with any of his peers to whom he was sexually attracted, although he later said that he had been fondled by an older youth and did not find the experience unpleasant. On one occasion, he also caressed and fondled the body of his older brother as he slept. As a result of this, Olaf Jr. began to suspect his brother was gay and regularly belittled him in public, referring to Dennis as hen, which is Scotic dialect for girl. Nilsen initially believed that his fondling of his sister may have been evidence that he was bisexual. So one of the McDonald triad, the belittling.
Yes.
At age 16, he decided to join the Army, where he worked as a cook and chillingly a butcher. Within weeks, Nilsen began to excel in his Army duties, and he later described his 3 years of training at Aldershot as the happiest of my life. He relished the travel opportunities afforded him in his training and recalled as a highlight his regiment taking part in a ceremonial parade attended by both the Queen and the Field Marshal Lord Montgomery of Alamein. While stationed at Aldershot, Nilsen's latent feelings began to stir, but he kept his sexual orientation well hidden from his colleagues. Nilsen never showered in the company of his fellow soldiers for fear of developing an erection in their presence, instead opting to bathe alone in the bathroom, which also afforded him the privacy to masturbate without discovery. After he left the Army in 1972, he pursued a job as a police officer. In 1973, Nilsen completed his police training and was posted to Williston Green. Still a cadet and a junior constable, he performed several arrests but never had to physically subdue a member of the public. Nilsen enjoyed the work, but he missed the camaraderie-ship of the Army. And while he wasn't a cop for long, he was at his posting long enough to develop a macabre fascination with dead bodies and autopsies. Nilsen then went on to become a recruitment interviewer, and he also moved in with another man, an arrangement that went on for 2 years. While the man later denied that the two shared a sexual relationship, it was clear that his departure in 1977 was devastating to Nilsen. Nilsen's first official brush with police came in 1973. David Painter, a young man whom Nilsen had met through his work, claimed that Nilsen had taken pictures of him while he was asleep. Painter was so incensed that he required hospitalization as a result of their confrontation. Nilsen was brought in for questioning about the incident, but was subsequently released without charge. He began to actively seek out sexual encounters, but he felt lonely each time a new partner left. In 1975, he took up cohabitation with David Gallichan in a garden apartment situated at 195 Melrose Avenue in North London, although Gallichan denied they had a homosexual relationship. This lasted 2 years, and when Gallichan left, Nilsen's life began a downward spiral into alcohol and loneliness, which culminated in his first murder 18 months later. So Nilsen decided he would try to force the men to stay by killing them. But despite his murderous urges, he claimed that he felt conflicted about his actions once the deed was actually done. Dennis Nilsen said, the greater the beauty in my estimation of the man, the greater was the sense of loss and grief. Their dead, naked bodies fascinated me, but I would have done anything to have them back alive. Between 1978 and 1983, Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 men and boys and attempted to kill 7 others. He initially confessed in 1983 to having killed about 16 victims. The majority of Nilsen's victims were homeless or gay men. Others were heterosexual, people he typically met in bars, on public transport, or on one occasion outside of his home. All of Nilsen's murders were committed inside the 2 North London addresses where he resided in the years he was known to have killed. His victims were lured to these addresses through guile, typically the offer of alcohol and or shelter. Dennis Nilsen's first victim was a 14-year-old boy he had met at a pub on the day before New Year's Eve in 1978. The boy accompanied Nilsen back to his apartment after he promised to supply him with alcohol for the night, and eventually the youth fell asleep after drinking with him. Fearing that the young boy would leave him if he awoke, Nilsen strangled him with a necktie and then drowned him in a bucket filled with water. He then washed the boy's body and took it to bed with him, where he attempted a sex act and then simply fell asleep next to the corpse. He later remarked that he found the corpse beautiful. Eventually, Nilsen hid the body under the boy's body underneath the floorboards of his apartment, and he would stay there for several months until Nilsen finally buried him in the backyard, and meanwhile, Nilsen continued to seek out new victims. Nilsen had another close call with the police in October of 1979 when a young student accused Nilsen of trying to strangle him during a bondage play session, but despite the student's claim, no charges were ever pressed against Nilsen. Some of the boys and young men were homeless or sex workers, while others were tourists who were visiting the wrong bar at the wrong time. But no matter who they were, Nilsen wanted to keep them all to himself forever and blamed this sickening urge on his loneliness. Nilsen encountered a second victim, Canadian tourist Kenneth Ockenden, at a pub on December 3rd, 1979. Following a day of sightseeing and drinking, which ended at Nilsen's apartment, Nilsen again succumbed to his fears of abandonment and strangled Ockenden to death with an electrical cable. He cleaned up the corpse as he did before and shared the bed with it overnight. He took photos, engaged in sex, and finally deposited the corpse under the floorboards, removing it frequently and engaging in conversation as if Ockenden were still alive. Excuse me.
Gross.
Yes. I did say this is the gruesome story of Dennis Nilsen.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Before moving to 23 Cranley Gardens, Nilsen lived in an apartment building with a garden, and initially he had been hiding corpses under the floorboards. However, the smell eventually became too much to bear, so he started burying, burning, and disposing of his victims in the garden.
The English expression garden is the same as like backyard.
Yes. Believing that it was just the internal organs that were causing the smell, Nilsen took the bodies out of their hiding places, dissected them on the floor, and often saved their skin and bones for later use. His third victim, some 5 months later, was Martin Duffy, a homeless 16-year-old who he invited to spend the night on May 13, 1980. As with his first victim, Nilsen strangled and drowned him before bringing him back to his bed and masturbating over the teenager's corpse. Duffy was kept in a wardrobe for 2 weeks before joining Ockenden under the floorboards. His next victim was prostitute Billy Sutherland, who was 27, who had the misfortune of following Nilsen home one night. He too was strangled. Another one of his victims, 24-year-old Malcolm Barlow, was an orphan with a learning disability who was soon dispatched by strangulation. Not only did he keep many of the corpses, but he often dressed them up, took them to bed, watched TV with them, and performed depraved sex acts with them. Even worse, he later defended this disturbing behavior, saying, quote, "A corpse is a thing. It can't feel, it can't suffer. If you're more upset by what I did to a corpse than what I did to a living person, then your morals are upside down." To dispose of the body parts he didn't want to keep, Nilsen would routinely have small bonfires in his backyard, secretly adding human organs and innards to the flames along with tire parts to hide the inevitable smell. The body parts that weren't burned were buried near the fire pit, but these methods of disposal wouldn't work at his next apartment. By 1981, Nilsen had killed 12 men in the apartment, only 4 of whom could be identified. And given his penchant for preying on the homeless and the unemployed in a large city, this is probably less surprising than it might be in a smaller community. Nilsen claimed he went into a killing trance and on 7 occasions actually freed the men rather than complete the act because he was able to snap out of it, but the majority of his victims were, of course, not so lucky. Unfortunately for Nilsen, in 1981, his landlord decided to renovate the apartment and he had to move to a new location. As 23 Cranley Gardens didn't have enough outdoor space for Nilsen to discreetly burn the body parts, he had to get a little more creative with his disposal methods. By the time Barlow was killed, Nilsen was forced to stuff him under the kitchen sink as he was rapidly running out of storage space with half a dozen bodies hidden around the apartment. He was forced to spray his rooms twice a day to be rid of the flies that were hatched from the decomposing bodies, and when neighbors complained about the smell, he convinced them they stemmed from structural problems with the building. To get rid of the corpses, he would remove his clothing and dismember them on the stone kitchen floor with a large kitchen knife, sometimes also boiling the skulls to remove the flesh, also placing organs and viscera in plastic bags for disposal. He buried limbs in the garden and in the shed and stuffed the torsos into suitcases until he could burn the remains in a bonfire at the end of his garden. And on occasions, he would burn fires all day without raising suspicion from the neighbors. He generally crushed the bones once the fire had consumed the flesh, and police found thousands of bone fragments in the garden during later forensics examinations. In 1982, in a desperate attempt to stifle his homicidal behavior, Nilsen moved into a top-floor apartment at 23 Cranley Gardens, Muswell Hill, also in North London, which had no garden and no convenient floorboards. Still unable to quell his impulses, a further 3 victims were killed in this apartment between his arrival and February 1983. The victims were identified as John Howlett, Archibald Graham Allen, and Stephen Sinclair, and presented Nilsen with much greater disposal challenges given the apartment's lack of direct access to outdoor space. He overcame these obstacles by boiling the heads, hands, and feet and dissecting the bodies into small pieces that could be flushed down the toilet and disposed of in plastic bags. Assuming that the flesh would either deteriorate or sink far enough into the sewers that it wouldn't be found, Nilsen began flushing human remains down his toilet, but the building's plumbing was old and not quite up to the task of disposing of human beings. There were 5 other tenants at Cranley Gardens, none of whom knew Nilsen well, and in early February of 1983, one of them called out drain specialist Dino-Rod to investigate the drain blockage. In the presence of the tenants, including Nilsen, the technician discovered rotting human remains when he descended via the outdoor manhole, and it was decided that a full investigation would be conducted the next day after police would be called in to investigate. Nilsen, increasingly aware of the prospect of capture, tried to cover his tracks by removing the human tissue from the drains at night, but was spotted by the downstairs tenant, who became suspicious of his actions. It was reported that on the morning of February 9th, 1983, he told a work colleague laughingly, "If I'm not in tomorrow, I'll either be ill, dead, or in jail." Upon a thorough investigation of the apartment building pipes, the human remains were easily traced back to Nilsen's apartment. Nilsen was met on the evening of February 9th by Detective Chief Inspector Jay, who informed him that they wished to question him in relation to the human remains that had been discovered in the drains. Upon entering the apartment, Jay noticed the pervasive foul odor and asked Nilsen what it was, at which point he calmly confessed that what they were looking for was stored in bags around the apartment, which included 2 dismembered heads and other larger body parts. And although he admitted to committing between 12 and 15 murders, he claimed he couldn't remember the exact number. He was formally charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 attempted murders. Upon his arrest, he immediately provided exhaustive details about the killing spree, admitting to killing 15 young men despite receiving a legal caution. He also admitted to the attempted murder of 7 others, although he could name only 4 of them. But at no point did he show any remorse and appeared eager to assist police with amassing evidence against him, even taking them to his old address to point out specific disposal details.
Wow.
After the confession, Nilsen was held at the Brixton prison pending trial, and whilst there, he wrote over 50 notebooks of his memoirs to assist the prosecution, and also drew what he referred to as sad sketches which detailed his treatment of some of the victims. He seemed ambivalent about his fate, and at turns without remorse, and then showing concern about public attitudes towards him. He fired his legal counsel, then rehired him, and fired him once again shortly before he came to trial, and his trial commenced on October 24th, 1983. Nilsen was charged with 6 counts of murder and 2 charges of attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, citing diminished responsibility due to mental defect. The prosecution relied primarily on the extensive interview notes that resulted from his arrest, which took over 4 hours to read verbatim to the jury, as well as the testimony of the 3 victims, Paul Knob, Douglas Stewart, and Carl Stoddard, who had managed to escape, and all of whom he had attempted to strangle. Despite attempts by Nilsen's defense to undermine the testimony of these victims by introducing evidence of their sexual encounters with Nilsen, their harrowing accounts inflicted serious damage on the defense's case. Physical evidence, including photographs of the murder scene, as well as the chopping board used to dissect the victims and the cooking pot used to boil their skulls, feet, and hands, which is now on display at the Black Museum at Scotland Yard. The defense case relied primarily on the testimony of two psychiatrists, Dr. James McKeith and Dr. Patrick Galway. McKeith described Nilsen's troubled childhood, inability to express feelings, and the resulting separation of mental function from physical behavior, which affected his own sense of identity and implied an impaired responsibility on the part of Nilsen. Under intense cross-examination by the prosecution, however, McKeith was forced to retract his judgment about this diminished responsibility. The second psychiatrist, Galway, diagnosed Nilsen as suffering from a false self syndrome characterized by outbreaks of schizoid disturbances, which made him incapable of premeditation, but most of his testimony was extremely technical, even giving the judge cause to question Galway's complex diagnosis. The prosecution called Dr. Paul Bowden as rebuttal psychiatrist who had spent considerable time with Nilsen, finding no evidence for such of the testimony as put forth by the defense psychiatrist. He stated that Nilsen was manipulative with some signs of mental abnormality, but nevertheless still cognizant of or responsible for his actions. During the summing up, the judge dispensed with the majority of the psychiatric jargon that had perplexed the jury by instructing them that a mind can be evil without being abnormal. The jury retired on November 3rd, 1983, but were unable to reach an unanimous verdict. The following day, the judge agreed to accept a majority verdict, and at 4:25 p.m., they delivered a verdict of guilty on all 6 counts of murder. And the judge sentenced Dennis Nilsen to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years. In the early 1990s, Dennis Nilsen claimed further notoriety when he commented on the arrest of the American serial killer Geoffrey Dahmer, since he also preyed on young men and boys. But Dahmer soon became so infamous that Nilsen eventually gained the title of the British Geoffrey Dahmer, even though he had been arrested long before the actual Geoffrey Dahmer. Aside from targeting males, Nilsen also had many things in common with Dahmer, including his method of strangling victims, performing necrophilia on the corpses, and dissecting the bodies. And when Dahmer was arrested, Nilsen weighed in on his motive and also accused him of lying about his cannibalism. When asked whether he ever ate any of his victims, Nilsen insisted he was strictly a bacon and eggs man. At some point while in prison, he recorded a set of chilling audio tapes describing his murders in graphic details, and these audio tapes were explored in a Netflix documentary entitled Memories of a Murderer, the Nilsen Tape, which was released on August 18th, 2021. And in 2018, Dennis Nilsen died in prison at age 72 after suffering a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm. He spent his final moments laying in his own filth in his prison cell, and he was reportedly in excruciating pain. And that is the story of Dennis Nilsen.
Wow.
Thanks for taking that ride with me.
Well, thank you. That was gruesome. Man, you weren't kidding. That was gruesome.
I did. I forewarned you on that. I told you it would be.
Yes, sir.
I don't lie when I say things like that. So anyway, with that takes us to the end of a recording week. As I said, again, it's the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows and the bad and the good. You take it however you want it, whichever direction you want to take that.
Yes, sir.
So as always, you can find more information on what we talked about today on our website, nerderyandmurdery.com. You can find links to everything we discussed, plus pictures, various other things we talk about, plus our YouTube list.
Yes, we have a YouTube page, in which case every episode has a playlist to give you examples of what we're talking about, at least on the nerdery side, and also things that we think are funny. Yes,
I do appreciate all the work you do on that.
Appreciate your work as well, sir.
You can also find the link to our merchandise for if you wish to show off your nerdery and murdery fandom. Please do consider picking up a piece of our merchandise there. It goes to help support our show. Along with our patrons, if you consider being one of our, we have the link to our Patreon. So if you wish to become one of our patrons and help us with the cost of this show, it does help us out, as there are costs to keep us on the air and keep everything going. So we appreciate each and every one of you.
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And last but not least, please don't forget to leave a 5-star review wherever you can. It really helps us, helps others find our information that may be looking for us, and helps keep us going. So with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
And I'm Geoffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.